How's everyone holding up?
Great.
It's Groundhog's Day.
Hanging in there.
Yeah. Groundhog's Day is right. Exactly. Karen and I sat down to calculate how many days. I think we came up with it had been 42 days for us. It's crazy how it all blends together. Yeah.
I feel like we're still in the Seder. Why is this day different from yesterday and every other day?
Yeah. Can you believe it's been 2 weeks since Seder too?
Wow.
No.
Yeah, it's been more than 2 weeks because I counted the 14th day of the Omer a couple nights ago now. So yeah.
Well, they did 16 last night.
Yeah, there you go. So we are in the middle of one of these sections in Vayikra in Leviticus that I think it's fair to say is one of those that somewhere between jokingly and seriously, this is one of those parshiot that like B'nai Mitzvah kids learn to dread, right? Because it has nothing to do with our moment today. That's the sort of classical critique. And we'll even look, we're going to look at some 1,000-year-old critiques that sort of make the same critique. And yet, here we are in 2020. And what is this week's Parsha about? It's about living in a time of pandemic.
Yeah.
So I want to start just by sort of appreciating that. We're going to dive into some commentary and looking at it. But to me, that's been one of the really meaningful things about sort of engaging with Jewish study during this pandemic is that we have such a long memory and such a long history as Jews that it extends so much further back than just, 50 years or 100 years, right? Everyone keeps saying that there hasn't been a pandemic like this in 100 years. To enter into a Jewish conversation is to have a conversation with 3,500 years of history. So anyways, just an amazing thing to have that waiting for us today. Any thoughts before we jump into some commentary though?
What was funny this morning, I'm watching the news and they're now showing where there's a scaliness or a tsaris on young folks' foot,
I'm
thinking, and that can be part of the virus. They're not sure yet, but I just thought it was kind of funny how this played out with a scaliness.
Yep. Yeah, Rabbi Dale.
So I just wanted to say that this was Elisa Rachel Schreiber's bat mitzvah portion, which means it was also mine. And she invited me to do it with her, and what a struggle it was to find an appropriate meaning for being disallowed after childbirth.
Yeah.
She did the Metzorah, I did the Tazria, but in any event, it brought back a lot of wonderful memories. So, kol kavod in advance, Rabbi Daniel.
Any other thoughts on sort of where we're at broadly before we?
Well, Susan did a great teaching on exactly what Dale said last night, and I wish I could remember it.
Oh, what did she say? Yeah, I'd love to know. Does anyone remember?
I wish she would write it down. I mean, she specifically spoke about how people have the difficulty dealing with, the separation after childbirth and looking at it on a surface level. Isn't that very cruel to separate someone from community when she needs it the most? And then in her typical Susan way, she kind of put a whole big circle around it and tried to uncruel it. But I'm not equipped to do what Susan did, but it was really good.
Was that one where Jim went, "That was good, Susie," and then he went on and said, "But we can come out different from this, and we can look at it and come out stronger." That was something that I wanted to work on myself. How am I going to come out stronger and different? I am going to have a very clean desk at the end of this, that's for sure.
So my interpretation, and I was working with Rabbi Zimond at the time, is that according to the rabbis, boys learn the way of men from their fathers, and girls learn the way of women from their mothers. And so by giving girls an extra opportunity to be nurtured at the breast and in the confines of this space where mothers are no longer allowed to light candles or do any of the ritual things, but boys are brought into the main common center so that they can be celebrated as men, future men. And in truth, we segregate our daughters with their mothers at the same time that we're commanded to circumcise our sons. So what's the connection between that? It's about creating respect and helping each gender learn their identity at the times that they existed.
Nice. Okay. So let's jump into some text then. Let me share my screen. Sorry, and I have the restream up, so this is going to get a little meta there for a second. Let's see ourselves streaming ourselves. Okay. Tezria. Yeah, actually, I always like to share one of my favorite memories of this Parsha is I was at a shul in Jerusalem. I have very close relatives, Orthodox relatives, who were like grandparents to me. And when I would go to Jerusalem, or when I would spend Shabbos with them in Jerusalem, I would go to this same shul every morning. And it was most of the people there were Anglos from America. And so they finished reading this Parsha, and one of the people reading turns to the other one and goes, "Well, Mazel Tov, you're now a board certified dermatologist." So I always think of it with this Parsha, because this Parsha is all about public health in a dermatological pandemic, or a pandemic that has dermatological features to it. Okay. So we're going to let Nechama Leibowitz take us through this a little bit. Who was of a blessed memory Nechama Leibowitz? Anyone have an insight? We'll come back to the text in a second.
I think she was one of the first female Orthodox that was allowed to do Torah, or whose Torah commentary was accepted.
So, yep, a lot of really important features of her biography there. Woman, Orthodox, really important for Torah study. Broadly speaking, the way that people study Torah today, from the Orthodox world to the Reform world, is that when you study the Torah, and this is not everywhere, but when you study the Torah, you're actually going to study a history of commentary and discussion of the Torah, right? You're not going to look at it on its own. You look at it with Midrash and Rashi and so on and so forth. She is the one who really revolutionized Torah study in that way. She was an Israeli, Anglo-Israeli, I think Anglo-Israeli, Anglo-European? I don't remember. She and her brother, during their lives, her brother actually was probably more famous. Today, she definitely is more famous. Her brother was a public philosopher with an important radio show, Yeshayahu Leibowitz. But she was a teacher, and she would have these correspondences with her former students where they would write to her, and she would send them questions on that week's Parsha, and they would go back and forth. And it turned into such a thing that she started making these sheets on the Parsha each week that she would mail out. And we're talking literally mail them out, right? To her former students who she was just beloved with. And I think it's not until after she died. This is totally sort of clothed in mythology here. I could be wrong on this piece. But I think it was not until after she died that they gathered all of these sheets and realized that there was a full Torah commentary that she had produced. And so you can buy it. It's gone out of print. It's in print. I think it's available on Sefaria now, though maybe only in the Hebrew. I don't remember. So we're going to let her take us through this Torah portion just a little bit. Any questions on her biography, anything like that before we jump in?
No.
Great. Okay, someone want to read? And I should say that it's her introduction here, but this whole section is her. So even the other commentaries that we're looking at in this top section are commentaries that she has pulled.
The subject in this double weekly reading, leprosy of the body, of garments, and finally of houses, are puzzling and mystifying. Are they simply simply the natural symptom of disease, mold, and rot? In the event of Torah, in that event, Torah offers us orders of a health ministry, or perhaps we have,
Okay, hold on, pause for a second. What has she said so far? What is her point here?
Well, if the subjects are, I guess, leprosy or other skin diseases, the Torah's offering a health ministry to address it.
Okay. Back away from it for a second. What's her bigger critique that's happening right now?
It's puzzling. It's a mystery.
Why is this in the Torah?
Exactly.
Right? Like, actually, this year, it's harder to ask that question because we're living in pandemic also. By the way, it's worth noting, because we're not going to dig into this, right? Like, what does the Torah say to do in a pandemic? What are the broad strokes? Social isolation and wash your hands.
Yeah.
Things haven't changed that much, right?
You have to live outside the camp.
Right? It's social isolation.
Right.
So yeah, the question here before us that Nechama's raising is, why are we talking about this at all?
Because
funny,
it's
because you said
contagious.
wash your hands, but it's also they're saying wash your garments. And that's exactly what they're telling people that come home from essential workers. Wash your clothes before you enter.
Yep. Yeah, my sister has a whole like undressing location. She's a nurse in Seattle.
Yeah, that's my niece.
So the Torahic concern is always with contagion, right? Holiness is contagious, and so is disease, and so is idolatry.
Oh, I like that. I like that framing.
That's great.
So she's saying, what's the deal here? And, we'll each find our own deal. But for me, it's this concern, this obsession with contagious elements in our formation.
But what did people in that period of time know about things being contagious? They didn't know about microorganisms, for example.
You don't have to know about a microorganism to know that if you stand next to somebody and you develop the same elements, or if you follow your friend around to the high places and suddenly you're bringing an offering, it wasn't about the science. It was the way in which the physical elements played out in the community and the way they connected the dots.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep, go ahead, Renee, and then let's keep going.
Okay, so I think there's often a real difference of opinion on the part of the interpreters as to whether we're talking about actual hygiene or whether we're talking about ritual purity. And, you've got like the followers of Maimonides who say, well, this is all about health, but remember that he was a physician. And then you have other people who said there really wasn't a clear concept of that at the time. This is about ritual purity and who's pure enough in spirit to enter to be part of the community, to enter the Mishkan. And I don't actually think they differentiate between the two. I think the concept of ritual purity and hygienic purity is pretty much one and the same.
Or at least it's commingled and impossible to be separated. I mean, we do the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, Marion, if we read further down in the paragraph, Bravanel is.
So yeah, let's keep going. So someone keep reading the Nechama.
Perhaps we have something supernatural the special intervention of providence designed to warn the faithful to repent of their evil way. Down the ages, the opinions of Jewish commentators, scholars, and thinkers have varied from the extreme to the other in propounding solutions. Strange enough, it is just those commentators who opposed explaining the dietary laws from the hygienic point of view who now approach the subject of leprosy from a rational medical standpoint. Thus, Avranel, who took issue with Rambam, God forbid that our Torah should be as one of the minor medical treaties, who offers this type of explanation.
So just pausing for a second to give some context to background. Abravanel, later commentator, takes issue with Maimonides, with Rambam, because Rambam explains the dietary laws as being fundamentally about public health. And Abravanel is objecting to that here, right? But the irony is that Abravanel, when it comes to this, is explaining it as public health, and as we'll see in a moment, Maimonides does not. So I don't know that we need to dig into the Abravanel here, but I wanted to finish that paragraph of Nechama's because she's saying much the same as what Renee was saying, right? That we have had these two. Was it Marion who said that?
No, I said it.
No, it was Renee. Yeah. No, Marion, we get the great view of the cat.
I think there was some idea in this time that diseases or things like leprosy and so forth were the result of you not observing the law or being pure at heart and so forth.
So let's
punishment.
Let's jump down to Rambam here, because what we're going to see is a radical turn with the meaning of this disease that becomes the normative understanding in rabbinic tradition. So will someone read the Rambam at the bottom of the page?
Leprosy is not a natural phenomena. You just jumped. Where are you? But constituted a sign and wonder for Israel to warn them against evil talk. For as for them that indulges in evil talk, the walls of their house change. If they repent, the house becomes clean. If they persist in wickedness, then their skins become affected and change. If they repent, they become clean. But if they persist in their wrongdoing, then their very clothes that cover them must be burnt, and they must dress. Apart from the morality of this, your sister is doing this right now, Danny.
Yeah, that's true. That's totally true.
Yeah, with your clothes on, off, sterilizing. It's amazing.
Okay, so what is Maimonides telling us? Like, what is his argument here?
On a surface level, it almost seems to go against his medical reasoning about everything, and he's talking about sin.
Totally. Keep going. Someone else want to add?
Well, there seems to me there's two vectors. One is that it comes from the body and then to your clothes and then to your house and then to the community, or does it come from outside and then infect you on the inside?
Nice. Right. He's making this fundamental turn. First of all, I want to point out there's something deeply problematic, or there can be something deeply problematic with this turn, right, that points towards something supernatural as a cause for something public health, right? Like at some level, this is the same. On the surface, this is the same sort of thinking as those who would blame, the pandemic on, I forget, there was one of them who blamed it on the Jews recently.
One?
There's always one of them who blamed it on the Jews recently, right?
A million.
Yeah. But I don't actually think that's what Maimonides is doing here. He tends to take things from the far past and let them live in a sort of supernatural world that doesn't exist in his moment. In that sense, he's not so different from maybe how many of us think, or how we deal with it. And so I don't think he's dealing with this in a literal sense. He is, however, picking up this classic rabbinic tradition and building upon it that says that anytime we encounter Sara'at, right? By the way, this is where we get our Yiddish word surus from.
Ah,
Oh,
cool.
wow.
Right, oy, my surus, right? Like,
Right.
Leprosy.
Also going back to say that psoriasis has been an issue of Jews for thousands and thousands of years. I guess that's the other read here. Yeah. This becomes associated in rabbinic tradition with Lishon Hara, with this concept that is translated often as malicious gossip, but is actually it's a more subtle category than that. So we're going to dig in and look at some of what is Lashon Hara. So I just wanted to pause and take a moment to be troubled by the fact that like we're totally the theological thinking involved in this term can be problematic. So we're just avoiding thinking about that too much. Renee.
There also does seem to be on the Rambam's part this recognition that despite the fact that your disease might be a very personal challenge, tragedy, difficulty, that there's a totally social component to it, and
Nice.
it cannot be considered in isolation of the rest of the community. And
That's
it can't
great.
even be treated without thinking about the larger community.
That's great.
And boy, does that have implications for today.
Yeah.
I'll try to do this succinctly. I'm sure that many of you know the story that Rabbi Jim wrote his senior year Torah study on this portion. And he plays with it. I have a copy of it. I asked him for it years ago. And if I've got many of your emails, but for those of you who don't have it, you could take my email and I'll send it to you. I'm getting it ready to send now to the email. He played with this whole idea. First of all, the story goes that he tried to get rid of it. And there is a story, as only Jim can tell it, of him trying to horse trade it. Nobody else would take it. They had picked portions by lot. And then he ended up winning the contest for the best Devar of the year with what he wrote. And he played exactly with this Lashon Hara idea, but he had it as he was like a noir detective, and the lady enters his office and then the words crawl around on the page and a variety of things. So I do in fact have a copy. If people have never heard of it or don't have it. And those of you who I have my emails for, I'm getting ready to send it. And if not, if you want it, B is in Buckle Rosen at brick.net. And if you ask for it, I'll send it to you. Okay. I hope that was short enough.
Well worth it.
Okay. Let's jump into some more text. Let's look at Lashon Hara.
Danny, Dale had her hand up. I'd love to hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed that, Dale. Yeah, please. You're still muted. Oh.
I was going to respond to Renee, and then I was listening to Marian, and there's so many approaches to this, but one of the things that Renee implied was community and individual. And of the 7 things that supposedly lead, 7 sins that lead to the idea of Surus, hardship, the only one that's visible is Lashon Hara. All the others occur behind a screen of privacy. And so the idea that you would be asked to go inside to do that darosh darash, that serious introspection, or to do what tefillah is, right? To do a self-accounting is an act of raising your consciousness so that you truly can change.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, does someone want to read Nechama again for us?
Marion, you read nice. Go ahead.
Actually, you know what? We can probably skip her summary here. We've done it on our own. And
What would you like me to start with?
let's read. Go ahead and start with the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, right there.
Rabbi Yohanan said in the name of Rabbi Yosei ben Zimra, the retelling of evil talk is tantamount to denying God. As it is stated, with our tongues we will prevail, our lips are our own, who is Lord over us? Rabbi Yosei said further, whoever retells evil talk is visited by plagues. Said Resh Lakish, what is the implication of the phrase, this shall be the law of the leper? Mitzorah. It means this shall be the law of those who spread evil talk. Motzi Shemra.
Can I ask a question, Danny?
Yeah.
Is there any significance? All these other guys are rabbis and Lakish is a Resh, or it doesn't matter?
So Resh Lakish is one of sort of the great members of this community of these early fringy rabbis. He has a really unique story. He's a former gladiator who wins his freedom in the ring. He and is it Rabbi Yochanan? He is in a pretty clearly a romantic relationship with, I think it's Rabbi Yochanan, but I could be remembering that wrong. And is known as sort of beautiful and huge. I mean, they talk over and over again about Resh Lakish being this like huge towering beast of a human being. I mean, he was a gladiator. Okay, this is the origin of this tradition of seeing it as leprosy. So first, I want to point out what's happening at the end. Sora is the name of this plague, right? Or the person who's plagued. And they're playing with that in saying that this is the same as Motzi Shem Ra, the person who spreads something bad, a bad name. That's the sort of play that begins this. But go ahead and look at what Rashi does with this also. Let's look at this whole section together. Will someone read that?
2 living birds. Since these plagues are penalties for evil talk, which consist of idle chatter, they were required to bring for their purification birds, which continually chatter and chirp.
Okay, I thought this was pretty clever, Rashi, right? Rashi's picking up on this tradition that it's about Lashon Hora and saying, oh, look, even in the Torah, what's the penalty or what's the offering that you offer at the temple after having leprosy? 2 birds. Why birds?
Chatter and chirp.
Right?
So
okay.
are we supposed to conclude from this that our current pandemic is a result of our gossip and bad deeds?
No, it's just the bad deeds of the guy at the top.
So, right, like Mike raises an important point, and that was sort of my broader point earlier with like this can be dangerous theology. The flip side is if you think of it in terms of values and not theology. What's the values move that the rabbinic tradition is making here? It's the move to say, like, let's look at ourselves and ask the question of what role did we play in this? What role did our lack of attention to public health? What role did our voting patterns? What role did our allowing of systemic racism? Look at how systemic racism is killing people of color during this pandemic in a way that it's a much higher rate than it's killing white people, right? Like we can ask these questions, and that can be one of the inclinations we have during these moments is to turn and ask, what was our role in this? But yeah, Mike, it can be really damaging and dangerous too.
I think it's dangerous though to go down that path. You know, I guess all of us have heard various right-wing preachers say that the bad things that are happening to us today are the result of allowing homosexuality and things like that. Stuff that makes no sense at all. So I'm
Totally.
a little nervous about that line of thinking.
Maybe it's just a time to
this is-
refocus and get focused on yourself and what's important in life, like family and your health, and some time to reflect.
But the rabbis also had an answer for
Nice,
this,
Betty.
because what they said is if you can't find anything that you're culpable for, then you don't have to assume the guilt. You don't have to think that bad things happen to good people because there was something bad you did. And we got rid of that along the way because there were too many experiences that showed that, you know what happens, right? Bad things do happen to good people and vice versa. And so that thinking, that causative thinking that existed in the biblical time frame and in the rabbinic mind isn't a reality that we share. But there are people who continue to hang on to it. And it could be viewed as a form of ignorance or a form of faith.
So let's jump into this question of what is Lashon Hara. I want to go to this category itself because, like I mentioned, I think it's a lot more. It's got different boundaries than any of the English word categories that we have, and I think there's a lesson within the boundaries of this category here. So someone want to jump in, and let's start with Yalkut Shimoni.
To what may the tongue be compared? To a dog tied with an iron chain and locked in a room, within a room, within a room. Yet when he barks, the entire populace is terrified of him. Imagine if it were loose outside. So the tongue. It is secured behind the teeth and behind the lips, yet it does no end of damage. Imagine if it were outside.
And go ahead and take the Talmud also. These two are in conversation with each other.
Death and life are in the power of the tongue, from Proverbs 18. Actually, a person's tongue is more powerful than their sword. A sword can kill somebody who is nearby. A tongue can cause the death of someone who is far away. Lashon Hara kills 3 people, the speaker, the listener, and the subject. Regarding one who speaks Lashon Hara, God says, I cannot dwell with them, as it says in Psalm 101. One who slanders their neighbor, them I cannot tolerate. One who speaks Lashon Hara is like one who denies God, as it says, Psalm 12. They have said, because of our tongue, we will prevail. Who is master over us?
Okay, what's being said about Lashon Hara, first of all? What are the rabbis doing with this here?
They're showing you the connection between one person's speech and then how it spreads in the community, how much damage it can do. Or I'm jumping ahead from it's the one about the pillow, break it apart and you can't gather the feathers back in.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Bad.
No matter how aggressive or that if you contain it, you can still hear it. But then if you let it go, the aggression is so impactful. It can be like a dog biting. The bark is scary enough, but to bite is even harsher.
Yeah, nice. Go ahead, Renee.
I think there are pains to make sure you recognize how, although it seems like a casual, misdeed, it's really of the most important, it's worthy of our primary attention. It's so much more damaging than you realize.
Nice. I had a friend who summarized it this way, teacher really, that Jewish history and Jewish text really is pretty convinced that sticks and stones can break our bones and words lead to violence.
Wow.
Right? Like it is not the playground version of it. We know that words lead to violence, and that words themselves can be violent. So let's talk about, go ahead, Bobby. Yeah.
I'm saying the Supreme Court agrees with you in the decision. I forget what it's called, but the nickname of it is the fighting words doctrine, that some words do cause violent actions.
So I want to talk about what is Lashon Hara for a second, because it's a different category than I think we're used to. Lashon Hara is, or it is only Lashon Hara if the gossip you are spreading is true.
Oh.
Right? Normally, I think our response is, no, this is awful, but I know for certain it's true, right? So I'm going to tell it to you. That's the only category that is Lashon Hara. Actually, if what you're spreading is not true, that's not Lashon Hara. You're also not supposed to spread those things, right? But that is not within this category of Lashon Hara that we spend so much time talking about in the rabbinic tradition.
It is also part of that definition that not only is it true, but there's no intent to correct it by the derogatory statement you make.
So Phil's getting into the next important category for Lashon Hara, which is that fundamentally it's Lashon Hara if the reason you're telling it isn't to help that person or to protect other people. So for instance, like one of the practical ones, this might seem ridiculous, but one of the practical ones you find in the Orthodox community early on in the internet age was, can you leave a bad review for a restaurant that gave you bad service, or is that Lashon Hara?
Wow.
Right? Most of the answers say it's not Lashon Hara, you're protecting people by doing this. Flip side is, like, it sometimes is Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara speaks, therefore, to the motivations of the speaker.
Danny,
Yeah, Bobby.
can I just ask, is there a rabbinic term for those who spread lies? If Lashon Hara is about spreading truth, is there something about spreading? Is there a term for spreading not untruths?
Rechilut, right? Rechilut, telling stories.
And is that considered as horrible as Lashon Hara?
There's a huge compendium on the ethics of speech, which kind of cover every part of the doctrine. But to get back to what you were just saying, which reminded me about for the public good, right? The intention of doing something for the public good. So let's say you disclose something about someone you don't particularly like, and it is true. And you do it for the sake of the public good. But what you're really doing is seeking revenge. And so again, the intention of what you do with your words is really what governs how the system, the whole systemic ethical tradition of how we use our words as weapons of mass destruction or sources of creation is really, really important. And they're hard to get into the nitty-gritty. But it's enough to know that you're not supposed to use your mouth for almost anything other than eating and saying things in ways that can be heard as both respectful and important by other people.
Nice.
That's
So
good.
the Chofetz Chaim, an important Orthodox thinker of, 150 years ago, 100 years ago, something, 150 years, I think. He has a teaching on this that goes so far as to say that you shouldn't even repeat good things about someone unnecessarily, because it can give an opportunity to someone else to say something bad about that person. And I'll never forget the first time I heard that. I was in Cincinnati. I was at someone else's congregation listening to them give a teaching about this. And I was only like half paying attention to the teaching. And I turned to the person next to me and mentioned the synagogue president. And I said, that synagogue president's doing a great job, isn't she? And the guy turns to me and starts going, I don't like her at all. She's terrible, right? Like it was an illustration of exactly this. So, I don't think it's worth taking too seriously the Chofetz opinion here, but yeah. Other thoughts, other voices. Leon. Hold on, you got to unmute yourself. Let me see if I can do it. Yep, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Am I on now?
You're on.
Yeah. The truth is that those of us who were in a business where we did comment on other people all the time, and I was in one of those businesses, the truth is that you can't avoid either one. They're unavoidable if you're going to comment at all. Now, that's not what the lesson is teaching, but I think it is the truth.
But there's still an ethic for journalism.
No, there isn't.
Yes, there is. Yes, there
If
is.
there isn't, no one ever told me that.
It's often crossed, but there is a border there.
I just saw this post, and it said that for those of you who don't remember Walter Cronkite, all he did was report the news. He just read it. So in the days back of Walter Cronkite, he just read the news.
That really was true. He was very opinionated.
Oh, well, I thought the whole premise, I'm not of the age of Walter Cronkite, but the whole premise, not knowing, the background with him, is all I know, my limited knowledge, is that he was a reporter. And I think just reporting basic facts and sticking to them is kind of like the playground. Like, you can say something and you don't have to have ill intent, but you're just reporting the facts. And like you said, it's always up to everyone's interpretation. So you're always going to use verbal language, and people interpret it a certain way, depending on maybe the culture, what's going on in their life. So if you just state a fact, then I don't think it can be, it's the person's responsibility how to interpret it. It's not their spin on it. And so I don't know Walter Cronkite and his specific person. I'm just saying in general, the whole premise behind it is that, it's up to the person how they interpret things and where they are in their life and how
it's true. And it depends on what you're covering too. If you're covering wars, for instance, there's no way of leaving your opinion out. There's absolutely no way.
Ron.
If you state the facts, 5 people died. Okay, what does that mean? Everybody has their own. As soon as I said that, everybody's like, well, who killed them? Or, were they reckless? So that's the premise, is what I think the Torah portion is like. Make responsibility for your own internal dialogue, how you interpret things.
In a war, both sides think that God's on their side.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, Ron.
It's also a matter of what facts do you choose to say, and what ones you chose to ignore, and then also what is your tone of voice as you're conveying those facts.
We just finished looking for a few weeks online. We were looking at the story of the 4 who went to Pardes from the Talmud, which in some ways can be read broadly as a critique of what happens when you say things that aren't true, even if you might believe them to be true, and how damaging they can be to a society, which is sort of the theme of the last 4 years of this country, I feel like.
Yeah, the president says that all the time.
Right, look, well, in quite a literal way with this, look at the way that the president's irresponsibly talked about this, what's this drug that doesn't work that he keeps touting is working?
Now he's talking about Lysol.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, or injecting yourself with the right, like
Clorox.
Right, the danger of speech.
So, Danny, so what we're always saying, I'm trying to wrap it around. Essentially, Lashon Hara, it's almost like journalism per se is Lashon Hara.
So
I
can't think of another any way out of that.
So the question is it in the public's interest or not? Or are you spreading it because it's a good story?
Well, the thing is, professional journalism is spreading whatever they believe will get the best circulation or the best ratings. That's been historically true. since it began, because that's how they make a living.
But Bobby, all history is biased. Somebody wrote it, so somebody had a perspective. And
Right. So is that what we're saying then?
Well, I think we don't all understand it that. We many of us just believe what we're told, and we think that there's more credibility to it. And so our job is to be skeptical. And one of the reasons we don't say good things about people or praise them, at least I was taught along with the Chofetz Chaim, is it causes jealousy and envy. And that leads to something else. So it's about being really, really careful. And journalists, it's a free-for-all out there.
Right. Well, I was also taught about not overly praising someone. My mom always used to talk to me about humility and modesty.
In the evil eye. Okay, I'm going to look at one last text and then I have to go because we're doing family service. So I need a couple minutes to go set up.
Wow.
Okay, we're going to look at the very last text here. Oh, no, not the last text. The second last text, this Hasidic story. Someone want to read that for us?
The Hasidic tale where a person once came to see Rabbi.
Someone read louder.
A little louder, please.
Yitzhak of Lubavitch, and proceeded to portray themselves as a villain of the worst sort. After describing at length their moral and spiritual deficiencies, they begged the Rebbe to help them oversee their evil character. Surely, said the Rebbe, you know how grave is the sin of Lashon Hara, speaking evilly of a human being. Nowhere to my knowledge does this say that it is permissible to speak Lashon Hara about oneself.
Interesting.
And with that, I will say goodbye.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
You can't even, that it's Lashon Hara even when you're speaking bad things about yourself.
Yeah.
Wow.
What does that mean?
But I thought Lashon Hara was only when you're speaking the truth.
But when you spread bad things about yourself, right? Some of us do that.
There's nothing bad about,
Example, Mike, that Phil, he's really good.
Well, you know what the Chofetz, I won't respond because you know what the Chofetz Chaim says.
I may say so myself, right? Self-aggrandizing or self-diminishing. I mean, people should denigrate themselves.
Just a comment about, though, being critical of things you read and hear on the TV and so